For RCR Wireless News, I'm Joey Jackson. On this episode of Cell Tower News, I talk about the latest technologies in tower test and measurement, from automation to cloud connectivity, with RCR's very own test and measurement specialist, Kelly Hill.
Today's episode is brought to you by Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board. telecomcareers.net.
For 20 years, NATE has been the undisputed global leader in safety, standards, and education for the wireless and broadcast communications infrastructure industries.
All right, welcome back to Cell Tower News, where we discuss the backbone of the wireless world. Before we discuss tower test and measurement with Kelly Hill, let's check in with Jared Matula, writer of the Cell Tower Wrap column on rcrwireless.com, to hear the latest news from the tower industry. Take it away, Jared.
This week's top tower stories involve carriers battling it out in court over towers. First, there's an update on the case of AT&T and a severely injured tower climber in Pennsylvania. Just to recap, AT&T had asked to be excluded from responsibility in the severe injury of Thomas Jeglum, who was doing routine repair and maintenance on a tower in Allentown, Pennsylvania, when a rung on the detachable ladder he was using gave way, causing him to fall 50 feet. Despite the carrier's claim that it is only a holding company incorporated in Delaware with headquarters in Dallas, the court wasn't buying it, denying AT&T's request. There's a big however that comes with this ruling, though. Well, it's not a ruling, it's just a decision at this juncture in the case. It could be temporary if Jeglum's attorneys cannot prove that AT&T does business in Pennsylvania or has at least part ownership of the tower in question. There are several subsidies involved in ownership, and according to the Supreme Court and other recent cases, AT&T cannot be held liable for the actions of its subsidiaries. Plus, a 1996 agreement was found that seems to point to Calvary Temple of Allentown as the tower owner. If that's the case, then Jeglum might be in trouble, as Calvary Temple has an indemnity clause in their agreement saying it is not responsible for any of the actions others take on their property, which would include this fall. It's a complicated case, and we'll be keeping an eye on it as it moves forward. All right, so the other big piece of tower news this week involves Verizon Wireless and Homeland Towers winning a precedent-setting court battle in East Fishkill, New York. Great name. So Homeland Towers had requested the building of a new tower in East Fishkill that would be used by Verizon to improve connectivity in the area. The city denied the request, and the companies took the city to court over the denial. In January, a district court sided with Homeland, declaring that the town had no right to deny the request, citing Section 332C7 of the Telecommunications Act. Despite the ruling, the town still refused to issue permits and instead appealed this decision, moving up the chain to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. That appeals court has now agreed that the district court was correct in its judgment. According to one of the attorneys for Homeland, this is a critical advancement of the law, particularly when it comes to regulatory barriers to services being provided in all wireless infrastructure scenarios, including towers. Well, that's it for me this week. For more tower news, check out my Tower Wrap every Friday on rcrwireless.com. Back to you, Joey.
All right, thanks for that, Jared. So to get in the heart of our discussion, let's talk test and measurement. Testing for passive intermodulation and other interference is very important to keep towers running efficiently. Advances in testing equipment has allowed tower technicians to do complicated testing that RF engineers previously only had the skills to do. Recently, Anritsu debuted a new cloud-based test system called SkyBridge, which brings together all of the macro and DAS testing equipment under one automated platform. I caught up with Tony D'Alessio, field sales manager for Anritsu's Western region, at the HetNet Expo in Los Angeles for a demo. Let's take a look at that video.
It's a cloud-based solution that actually automates the trace judgment for pass-fail. So one of the biggest challenges today with the DAS systems is 80% of the mobile traffic is now being driven by indoor applications, whether you're at the mall, the large outdoor venue, the stadium, etc. And DAS testing is very different than the macro site testing because of the number of deliverables and traces that are required. And so the existing trace management solutions that are out there today just don't properly address that. And so there's a lot of rework that's required, or it takes a long time for the contractors to get paid while it's going through the process. So we've come up with a solution we're very excited by called Enritsu Skybridge Tools, where again, it automates that process where you can easily create, test, and report. So taking a step back, if you look at the macro cells, as Jeff was saying, you basically do some line sweep testing, your return loss, distance to fault, PIM testing. So using the standard Enritsu handheld portfolio, you're going to have a limited number of traces that are submitted. And for a macro cell, it might be between 50 to 100 traces. When you scale up to a DAS system, the challenges go up exponentially just by the sheer volume of work. Not only testing the jumpers, you're now testing the larger segments. So for a single carrier system, you can see that there's a number of tests that need to be done, and you might have 4 more tests per cable. So if you have 100 to 500 cables, that's upwards of 2,000 deliverables. If you look at a neutral host system, that scales even more now, because now you have to test every frequency, 700, 850, 1900, 2100. So that becomes, I don't want to say a nightmare to manage, but very, very, very challenging to manage. So if you look at just how do you manage the deliverables, if you get a PDF format, and if I gave you a ream and a half of paper, what do you do with that? How do you know if any traces are missing, if anything's mislabeled? It's very difficult. As well as, the electronic format, when it's submitted, is anything missing? So here's a typical trace management flow from start to finish with the method of procedure creation down to when the contractor gets paid. And so we're looking at how can we automate that process to streamline it as much as possible. Again, that's where Enritsu Skybridge Tools comes into play. So you can easily create the test plan from the customer's method of procedure, or if you're using the IB-Wave cable routing, load that into the system. We have the ability now to auto-configure our test sets, the site masters and the PIM masters, and set up for one-button testing. So again, everyone's testing in a standardized way. The file naming is consistent. The technicians in the field don't have to spend the time typing every little file. It's being done by the system. And the real strength is the automated pass-fail analysis. That's no longer being done by eyeballing it in a judgment. The system is looking at the criteria, and you can validate on the spot if the traces are good or not. That way, before the technician leaves the site, he can upload the information via Skybridge into the cloud. It'll say, yes, those traces have passed, or are some deliverables missing. So before they leave and have to get called back again, which costs time and money, they can verify the work is done properly up front. And then once all the traces are submitted, the report generation is really automatic, and you can have your deliverable as a CSV format or a PDF, so you have a copy of all the traces, and that'll flow up the chain for everybody to review. So really with the Skybridge tools, it takes a very labor-intensive process where it's prone for errors and missing files or misnames, traces, and just streamlines the process. Again, providing the automated pass-fail on all the traces, making sure the closeout package is done efficiently so the contractor can get paid in a timely fashion, and the end customer, the service provider, they're happy with the work because now they're able to track it through the process.
All right, it appears that's going to be a pretty important technology moving forward, but to get some more insight on what this new technology such as this mean to the tower industry, I talked with RCR's very own test and measurement expert, Kelly Hill, to get her take. Let's take a look at that interview now. All right, I'm here with our very own Kelly Hill, who is actually a certified tower climber herself, and we're going to talk a little bit about test and measurement. Thank you for being on the show, Kelly.
Absolutely, Joey. Thanks.
And so let's talk testing in macro sites. Just give me a broad overview of what that entails.
Okay, so there's actually quite a bit of testing that happens at various levels when you're turning on a macro site. So you got your physical layer turn up, so you make sure that you have all your connections and whatnot. You got your transport layer or your backhaul. You get that turned on, and then then you go through sort of your wireless, your service and protocols. And so once you get all that stuff turned on, then you go back and you look at performance. Is everything functioning the way it needs to? Are you getting the throughput that you need? Are you getting the connectivity that you need? Is your Ethernet working? Then you start looking at end to end to the device. Is everything functioning? And you also start to look at things like mobility, handoffs. How are the interactions going with cells nearby? So you go through all of that. You get to carrier acceptance, and eventually you turn it over, and it becomes part of the macro network.
And so, who are some of the big players in the testing space for macro sites?
Yeah, there's quite a few. One of the big ones is Enritsu. We've also got formerly JDSU, now Viavi, is another. Kalis is another one. And then when you start to get into things like some of the drive testing and walk testing work, you also have Unite, which is now part of Keysight Technologies. Those are the four names that immediately come to mind for me.
All right, those are the big four, and so DAS and small cells are becoming a lot more prevalent. Is that changing the way that people are doing tests?
Yes, I would say definitely. As we've gotten this huge shift to traffic that is more indoors, you're seeing more reliance on DAS systems, especially in large venues, conference centers, and large stadiums. And you're also seeing small cell deployments, at least some, that are primarily, you have the residential deployments, which, don't necessarily get tested by carriers, but you also have things, that are starting to develop in terms of enterprise small cells and whatnot. And so you're seeing testing move inside. And so you don't have a guy climbing a tower. You can't necessarily get the information that you need by sending somebody out with a bunch of UEs hooked up in the back of a truck with computers and spectrum analyzers to record all of that. So you're seeing more walk testing equipment. Rudy and Schwartz, another company that does a lot. Sorry, I should have mentioned them before. But yeah, Rudy and Schwartz definitely, particularly both for base station and for walk testing. And you're also seeing guys like Unite again with their walk testing. So you've got a backpack full of devices. Sometimes a spectrum analyzer, and often controlled by a tablet. So you are seeing more of that because people need to be able to assess not just external RF and performance, but they need to be able to go up a building's floors to see how the performance is on each building, on each story of a multi-story building.
And so back to the macro sites. What are, as I mentioned, you're a certified climber yourself, so you can probably speak to this a little bit. So when people are up on the tower, what are some of the biggest challenges they're facing when they're trying to do these tests?
Well, so you've got, weather is a big one. If it's too cold, if it's too icy, if it's too rainy, it can get really dangerous up there. So you got to haul your equipment up, you got to haul yourself up, and then you've got to be able to handle everything, and particularly when it's cold, connectors, fastening connectors, tight but not too tight, because if it's too tight, it can cause passive intermodulation. You want to make sure that your connectors are clean. There's a lot of things to think about up there, and at the same time, safety is paramount, and you have to be able to, handle all of this equipment while you're attached to a tower with multiple connections, so that if one of them fails, that you've still got, something keeping you on there. So it's a lot to think about. And I think what you're seeing on the test equipment side is you're seeing an evolution towards equipment that's lighter, so that it's easier to handle, more portable, and can be easily hauled up a tower, so that it's not too heavy and bulky to be handling up there, and hopefully it's also simple to operate. You're also seeing some movement towards equipment that can be remote controlled. So you might have to, haul it up there, but once it's up there, you might be able to do some work or have somebody else do some work from the ground via remote control.
And the equipment's actually getting more easier to use, so that you don't actually have to be an engineer to use it now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more sort of automation. You're seeing a lot more automation. You're seeing a lot more cloud connection, and I think you're also seeing simplification. as they're trying to drive down costs in test, particularly as we look at more small cell deployments, the more that a cell tower tech can do, that they don't have to send an RF engineer out to the site to do, the more that they can have simple processes that, give a pretty straightforward pass-fail or help with troubleshooting to the extent possible before somebody has to leave and come back. All those things contribute to less test cost. And so you are seeing, more automation, more simplification. Is a pass-fail test good enough? Do you need to provide a specific number or range for what you're seeing? Or, can you send somebody out there and, you get a pass-fail and they know that's good enough and they can send that report off, and then the company gets paid.
And you mentioned passive intermodulation a little bit earlier, and it's a big issue that techs have to deal with. And you've written about it, an article explaining it. Can you give me an idea of what PIM is?
Yeah, PIM is basically it's noise, it's interference. It interferes with the propagation of the LTE signal, and in order to get the best spectral efficiency out of LTE, you basically need a clean signal. And LTE is particularly sensitive to noise. And so that's become more of an issue, for test, to really, be sensitive to PIM, to have folks, is there internal PIM in the system? Do you have dirty connectors? There's some really weird stuff out there that can cause PIM. I've had people tell me about, metal railings on buildings, things like, metal fences, rust, anything that can rust basically can be a source of PIM. And so you have to be very careful in your installation. They do some PIM testing for components as well, but when you get the system and everything's put together and you have all those connectors, there's still a risk there. And so people do have to pay close attention to that.
And you mentioned the cloud earlier, and Ritsu recently gave me a demo of their SkyBridge platform, which uses a cloud to kind of tie together all of these different testing equipments. How is that changing the way that people are doing testing?
I think we're seeing more of that. I think we're seeing more desire for cloud connectivity, and it's across a wide range of equipment and test, all the way from the lab to the field. The more control that you can do via cloud, it means that, you don't have to have necessarily a person physically there to adjust the equipment. You can get information from equipment remotely. So you have, maybe one RF engineer in an office who can have information coming in from multiple sites, and be sort of managing and overseeing multiple sites at once. So one of the attractive things I think for companies who are involved in installation and maintenance of cellular sites, because often when they get paid depends on when they turn in reports and everything shows that it passes muster. So the sooner you can get that information to the people who need it, the sooner they get paid. And that's a very attractive feature of cloud because they can send these things out from the field. Sometimes they can save money because it means that you have somebody there who can look at it and say, don't leave until this is fixed. And then they don't have, and then that reduces the cost of having somebody come back later to fix a problem.
And to go along with that is automation. That you see a lot more move towards automation in the testing space as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that one of the trickiest things in test, I think, are things like configuration, making sure that you're getting the right information that you want, that the files are being organized in a fashion that is, that is orderly and can be quickly and easily accessed and understood. And so having those bits and pieces of test automated, can really save some time, both in the field, and in terms of reporting. And so, I think you are starting to see more of that. It also comes back to simplification because the more that the equipment can take care of, and that doesn't have to be manually typed in or, manually configured. A lot of people still want the capabilities to do that if they want to, or if they need to. But as a general rule, I think our company's seeing a lot of value in being able to auto configure as much as possible.
And what about VoLTE? I mean, it's fairly new technology. It hasn't even really taken hold yet. Where is that headed, testing wise?
Yeah, I think, VoLTE hasn't quite, I think, taken off as quickly as, as maybe people have expected. It's been in a very long test phase, and there are some very good reasons for that. It's pretty sensitive to things like latency and jitter. And so, while your data service, if you're browsing the web, that little bit of latency probably you might not even notice. But if you're on a voice call, it's going to send everything just into a mess. I actually have VoLTE on my phone, and so I can hear that and see that. It's great when it works. It's fantastic. The voice quality is noticeably better, but it's definitely not available. On the scale that circuit switched voice is. So I think you'll see that expand. I've talked to some folks recently who have said that the challenge with VoLTE is that it's not like other services where you might be able to do a market by market rollout. And kind of have a small controlled population of users. It's kind of, you can be all in to the extent that you can. It's hard to do small scale VoLTE. And so, you'll see more and more of it get turned on. The devices are still, most of the devices that are VoLTE capable are very new. People might not have been through a device refresh cycle. Unless you really have to have that latest iPhone. And that's a fairly small percentage of the device base.
And so, Kelly, finally, let's look into your crystal ball. What do you see being a game-changing technology in the future?
I think, I don't know. I think this could be a game changer. And I think Nate is paying attention to this as well, and that's drones. If you can, send a machine up, to get a look at something, maybe even to haul stuff up, I think that is a technology that, when you think about sending people up towers, if there's a chance to do less and to have some of that taken over by drones, it's a dangerous business. And, the more of that we can pass off to machines, then I think that the better off the industry might be.
And that was actually what my show was about last week. Nate, they even started a new committee for drones called the Unmanned Aerial Systems Committee. And so they're definitely looking into that. And I think you're right. That's going to be probably the biggest game changer moving forward. But Kelly, that's all I've got for you. Thank you so much for joining me. And, we'll talk to you next time.
Okay. Thanks, Joey.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much for that great insight. And for more of Kelly's expertise, check out her test and measurement wrap every Friday on rcrwireless.com. So to close our show, I noticed a lot of tower technician jobs on telecomcareers.net, one of our sponsors, and I thought that I would highlight some of those here today. So American Tower is hiring 8 tower tech ops in Houston, Cleveland, Columbus, Ohio, Charleston, South Carolina, and Jackson, Tennessee, and as well as other markets across the nation. ABD Wireless is hiring 4 tower tech / foremen in Austin, Texas, Wichita, Kansas, St. Louis, Missouri, and Little Rock, Arkansas. For more on those jobs and many more, check out telecomcareers.net. Well, that's it for me. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be off next week for Thanksgiving, but in the meantime, I want to wish everybody a happy and safe Turkey Day. Take care of yourselves.
Cell Tower News is a production of RCR TV. To reach Joey Jackson or suggest a show topic for Cell Tower News, contact him at jjackson@rcrwireless.com or on Twitter at @duck_Jackson. For more Cell Tower News, please visit rcrwireless.com.